I think that there are many differences in education systems around the world. If you look at what's happening in Singapore or South Korea and compare it to what's happening in North America or in Denmark or in England, there are big differences in the structure of the system and in the details of the curriculum that's made available. But in many respects, they share a similar ideology. They are, for the most part, linear systems. And a good example of that is the fact that our children go through them according to their age. All the 5-year-olds get taught together, all the 6-year-olds, they move forward in industrial batches. There's often a big emphasis on conformity and on standardized testing. Often in many systems the curriculum has a hierarchy of disciplines. And the reason they're like this is that most education systems were developed in the 19th century. I mean, most systems of public education organized by the government came into being in the 19th century, and they came into being for the most part to meet the needs of the Industrial Revolution. So they're characterized as mass systems, and as a result I think a lot of people in the system find it doesn't speak to them individually. I know all kinds of people who've been through education in all countries who felt that they came out of it without ever discovering what their own talents were. They were good at taking exams, or they weren't good, but they didn't really discover who they were or what they could do. So that's the big problem. It's a system of mass production rooted in a different age. They're rooted in the 19th century. Well, the first step is to recognize that it is personal. I sometimes compare mass education to manufacturing. And if you look at some of the principles involved, it is a bit like making motor cars. The problem is that motor cars have no interest in how they're made. They just come out at the far end with no opinions on it, whereas people have opinions about what happens to them. And that affects whether they get engaged in it or they don't get engaged in it. So the first step to me is to recognize that education is about people, not about numbers. It's not about data, although all these things can help. That education is an active process that involves engaging people and exciting their imaginations and increasing their motivation and their energy. And if people feel detached or if they feel suppressed by the process, they're much less likely to be involved constructively. So it has to be personal. And that has a number of implications. One of them is for the curriculum, and the other is for assessment, and the third one is for styles of teaching. And actually, in that respect, I think there's a big opportunity for the use of new technologies. Well, I think you have to accept you can't put everything into a number. There was a quote from the former Defense Secretary of America, Robert McNamara. Actually, it's a tribute to him. It's sometimes called McNamara's fallacy. And the fallacy is the tendency to make the measurable important rather than important measurable. In other words, what happens is in schools, you're right, there's a tendency to believe that everything that matters can be given a number or a percentage. And of course, not everything can be given a number or a percentage, but the consequence often is that we put in the priority on those things that can. And I'm not against it, incidentally. I don't mean that we shouldn't have standardized tests. I don't mean that we shouldn't give people grades or percentages. But all of these things are diagnostic tools. The problem is, I think, rather than being seen as a means for education, they end up being seen as the purpose of education. So I remember years ago I was talking to some students who just were about to finish high school, and one of them had done a 4-year program in dance. And I said to her, "What did you get out of it?" And she said, "I got a B," because so far as she was concerned that was the result. But of course you get an awful lot out of a dance program in 4 years that you can't put into a number. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have those things, but you're quite right that if we end up mistaking the data for the student. And what we should be focused on is the development of each of the students and their natural capabilities. And the data can help, but they're no substitute for engagement. To me, this is all about pedagogy. If you think of it, there are three bits to education, three processes. One of them is the curriculum, which is what it is we want people to learn. And a personalised education system has implications for the curriculum. It means that we need to have curricula in schools which obviously provide people with a common core of things that you would like everybody to learn and know about, but which also offers opportunities for individual specialisation. For example, in many school systems, the sciences are much higher up the hierarchy than the arts are. And I'm not arguing against the sciences. I think the sciences are tremendously important. But for some people, that's not where they come alive at all. For some people, they only really come alive when they're playing music, or when they're in a play, or when they're studying poetry. And for some people, it's chemistry or it's mathematics. So one implication of personalising education is to have a broad curriculum, and then opportunities as people go through the school system to focus on things that they find most resonant with themselves. The second big implication is for assessment. So rather than having only standardized grades, we need forms of assessment which are much more descriptive of things that people can do. I was thinking about this recently, that if you think about it, an assessment has two elements to it. One of them is a description and one is a comparison. So if you say of somebody that they can play a particular tune on the piano, that's not an assessment. It's a description of what they can do. But if you say they're the best pianist in the city, well, that's an assessment, because you're comparing them to somebody else, to a standard. And what happens, I think, with most public assessments is they're very heavy on comparison and very light on description. So to support people's learning, we need forms of assessment that are much more descriptive. This is what they can do, and then some relevant comparisons. But the third bit of education is teaching. And the truth of the matter is that there is no system of education in the world that's better than the teachers. You know it if you think back to your own time at school. What you remember, apart from your friends, were the teachers. The ones that turned you on, the ones that turned you off, the ones that helped you, the ones that put you down, the ones that built you up. And great teachers aren't just people who are expert in their discipline. They're people who are experts in getting people engaged in the discipline, who can look in your eye and see whether you're getting it or not, and whether they can help you with it, and whether they can excite your imaginations. So the key to a personalised education is to invest in great teachers. And all the high-performing systems in the world know that and do that.